to stream. I recognize what I did wrong last time. Yeah, last week. I didn't have it set up to broadcast to YouTube because remember when we had the issues before? Oh, hold on, that's working.
Well,
oh, here we go. We're live.
Yeah, it says it's streaming.
Sound. Let's see. Here you go then. So, hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I'm looking for my iPad. It's over here. Welcome to VUX World. And without my mic today, unfortunately, because and I didn't get a chance to tell you both this before we started, but today I did a webinar this afternoon with Warricle, and during the build up to it, we did a bit of a kind of run through beforehand. And in that run through, I'm going through my presentation and I'm not getting any response. It's going really quiet. I'm thinking, what's going on here? Is this no good or something? And I got a phone call and it was them on the other end saying that everything's disconnected. And I thought, that's strange. Anyway, as soon as I put the phone down, my whole computer just turned off, and I managed to turn it back on again, but it's just froze. It's been froze all afternoon. So yeah, my whole computing life is just ground to a halt. And so I've got my headphones, I'm on my MacBook, and we're doing it like this. So yeah.
Hopefully you haven't lost any work.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I'd already saved that and sorted it all out. So yeah, we're all good. We're all good.
You struggle with that computer all the time. I think it's time for a new one, Kane.
Yeah, I know. I think it is. I've just been reluctant to pay for it. I'm northern, Dustin. I'm northern. I'm tight. I don't want to spend any money. I think it's about time. It needs doing. But anyway, how are you both? All right.
Doing well. The sun is shining.
It is. The sun's shining very nicely. Very nicely. How are you, Dustin?
Yeah, doing okay. Started apartment hunting, which is interesting.
Nice.
The secret to apartment hunting is the really nice apartments are always just $100, €100 outside of your budget.
Yeah.
You look just a little bit outside of your budget. You see the nicest apartments you've ever seen. Doesn't matter what the budget is. That's always a truism.
That's the rule. Well, best of luck with the search, and welcome everybody joining us. And apologies a little bit late. We've sorted it out. We've had nothing but technical difficulties today. My computer's on the blink, and broadcasting software is not our friend. But here we are, and thank you for tuning in. There's a few people tuned in already. We're going to run through, as we do all the time, every week on VUX World, the rundown. We're going to go through some of the top stories, some of the hot topics in the conversational AI and voice AI, and discuss it, try and translate it into something that makes it relevant for you working in the industry. Or if you're just an outsider observing and a fan of the industry, we're going to help you understand a little bit about what's going on and why it's relevant. I'm joined, as always, by Dustin Coates, and we are joined by May's guest co-host, Claire Mitchell.
Hello.
And, hello. Welcome. So if you've got any questions as we go through today, feel free, stick it in the chat on LinkedIn, and we'll do our very best to answer them. Any comments that you have on any of the things that we discussed, stick them in there as well. It's always nice to have a bit of a discussion going on. And so, without further ado, we'll kind of get stuck into it. And there's been some interesting stuff going on. It's been fairly quiet, but one of the big things that's happened, Dustin, is the Webby Awards have been announced and the winners have been declared already.
Yeah, sure enough. And I don't know if this is the first year. I don't think it's the first year, but there's a separate voice category as well, which is interesting to see. I don't know too much about the Webby Awards. I don't know, Claire, if you perhaps know a little bit more than Kane and I do.
Yeah, I think it's always a nice place to look for inspiration of really great design and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in various platforms, and now including voice. And so it's a very high honor, I think, and it's exciting to see a new standard being set for what a quality experience could be like.
And it's interesting how we'll go through some of the categories and some of the winners, and we'll kind of discuss a few of the things that we know about, kind of thing. But what I found interesting is that the winners in the voice category, they're not all like skills and stuff like that. In fact, there's a whole load of stuff in there which has got nothing to do with the platforms. There's apps in there, there's general technologies in there. There's a whole host of really interesting and a nice mix of stuff going on, which is really good. So
what were some of the ones that you...
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, what were some of the ones that stood out to you, Kane?
So the one that I really liked is, I'm just going to pull it up here. It is called Signs.
Mm-hmm.
And some of you might have, some of the people tuning in might have come across this. And if you're really in tune with the voice kind of industry, you might have seen some early examples of this. But essentially, what it does is it's for people who are deaf and can't speak, or people who can't speak. And essentially, what it does is it translates your sign. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know sign language. It translates your sign language into text, and then feeds that through the various assistant platforms so that you can actually use your likes of Alexa and Google Assistant and stuff like that, which is, I've seen some really early prototypes of it. Like, I don't know if it was the same person and people doing it, but I remember seeing something a while back of someone who had a Raspberry Pi and made something similar happen. But this is like a full platform. It worked with all of the various platforms, and it looks like pretty good stuff.
Yeah, that was actually my favorite too. I'm be curious to try it out. I'm curious about like, do you have to have can it detect your sign against like various backgrounds, for instance? How good is it in the image recognition piece? But I just love the way these folks thought outside the box to make this one happen.
What do you think, Dustin?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Little known fact about me, I was in sign language club in fourth grade, I believe it was.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember we would have a Christmas pageant of sorts where we would sign Christmas music is the one thing I remember about it. I swear all the cool kids were doing it. I don't remember any of it for sure, but it was definitely a lot of fun. And it's nice to see that accessibility as well. But certainly, we saw some of our former guests on there. We saw Food Network. We saw NPR on there as well. One that I've had the pleasure of working with at Algolia is WW, formerly Weight Watchers, there as well, which was not there for a skill or an action, although they have both of those, but for an app. And so, like you mentioned, Kane, it's not just on the smart speakers, but really cross-platform. We're seeing this.
Yeah, I also got a chance to work on one of the nominees/winners, the NPR Wait quiz, which was nominated for best writing. And the writing really is incredible due to the great minds behind the Wait, Don't Tell Me quiz show. And it also got technical achievement, which was interesting. I imagine part of that is just the idea that the decision was made to keep the fill in the blank rather than to have a multiple choice, which takes a lot of effort, especially on updating the content every week and updating the answers, making sure that pronunciations, variations on proper nouns and different ways of saying those answers are captured. So that was a really cool one to see.
So for those that are not familiar with I'm assuming it's like a TV show or something as well, but what is the Wait quiz and how does it kind of work?
So Wait, Don't Tell Me is a really popular radio quiz show. And there's also a live version that you can buy tickets to get to. But as part of the radio show, there's this quiz moment where you have a fill in the blank about current events, the latest news that's been going on in that week. And so the idea was to translate that experience of a passive radio show into an interactive game that anybody can play.
Nice, wicked. And what about the Weight Watchers one, Dustin? What was the what category was that? That was so look, I've got it up here somewhere. It was health. Was it health? No.
Yeah. I mean, as Weight Watchers implies. User experience, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, it's all about tracking your food and making sure that you're eating healthy and you've got a healthy lifestyle overall. They, I believe, have a voice component on their app, but I know they definitely have a voice component on Alexa and Google Assistant as well. They call it Wello, and it allows you to track foods that you eat. Essentially, this morning for breakfast, I had a handful of cashews and chocolate chip pancakes, and so it really makes it easy. I've been tracking my food for the past 6 years, and it's sometimes hard to remember and know exactly the right brand and everything because it matters. And smart speakers are a perfect mechanism for that, because it's right where you are in the kitchen when you eat, or in the living room when you're snacking, or wherever you are.
Is that really what you had for breakfast?
No, that's definitely not what I had for breakfast. I had Beyond Burgers with cheese, which is not really a breakfast food, but it's become my breakfast somehow. Yeah.
Beyond Burgers.
I don't subscribe to your notions. Of breakfast or lunch foods.
Rebel.
You had burgers for breakfast?
No, it's Beyond. So it's Beyond. So it's a fake meat. But yeah, I had burgers for breakfast.
Nice. A mate of mine used to have steak for breakfast at 5 a.m. before he went to the gym.
That's intense.
I still think it's crazy.
I mean, steak and eggs, right? It's a good meal.
Yeah. I agree. I'd have to try it. Yeah. But some of the other good things that were in there, talking about things that are not kind of necessarily inside the platform ecosystem, if you like, was the Pandora app. Was won actually the best branded voice experience. So they've had a voice interface in their app for quite a while. And I remember when I put some content and some videos out about Spotify, and how Spotify. It was when I don't know if you know Jane Manchung Wong, who has a Twitter account, and basically she leaks loads of like up and coming apparent releases and stuff like that. She hunts through loads of apps and she finds like hidden bits of code and images and stuff like that might signify what's coming soon. And she found that there was a load of references to Hey Spotify. So like there was the kind of the notion was that Spotify are going to have a voice assistant rather than just the voice search, which they've had for a while. And then I remember, I think it's Steve Keller, who's one of their audio head of audio or something like that, and he commented and said that Pandora have been doing that for ages, and seemingly, it must be working pretty well because they've won a Webby for it as well. That's pretty cool.
They also launched interactive voice ads not too long ago. I'm not sure if it's in beta or how active it is, but interesting to see that sort of evolution as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's, I can see that being really, really useful, because it's the thing with podcasts and things like that is that we tend to not do any midstream ads because it tends to interrupt the flow of the conversation. We do have promo sometimes at the beginning of the show, but what would be nice is to be able to say, here's the teaser. Do you want to hear more? And if you do, then you can carry on doing it that way. Maybe even reward people even more for going through and having the experience kind of thing. And you can make it more experiential as well, can't you? So rather than just a static linear piece of audio, you can make it a lot more experiential and turn it into something that actually is fun and engaging rather than just listening to an ad, which is quite interesting.
Totally. And make it personalized, sort of tailor the ad to the person.
One of the other ones in there, which I'm sure people are familiar with, we haven't quite managed to do a podcast with Nico Rory yet, but we have had it on a radar, is Drivetime. And so that won the People's Choice on games. But what's interesting about that, Amazon have recently invested in it. And for those of you that don't know about Drivetime, essentially it's an app that you dock in your car when you're driving. And then it's like an interactive radio show. And so maybe not necessarily Wait, Don't Tell Me-esque, because I think the idea is that it's supposed to simulate an actual radio show. And then it has quizzes in the middle of it and stuff like that. And so, Amazon invested in it recently. It's been going for quite a while now. It's been doing really well. So it's one of those very early entrants into the kind of domains outside of the home, which is, the car, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, maybe should we move on to the next stories? There's actually a couple that are related. Yeah, and I don't know who added. Yeah, I don't know who added these, but there was one about making sonic voices cry with Sonatic, and Facebook's new text-to-speech.
So the making sonic voices cry, that was one of mine, and the reason why I found it interesting is there's this company called Sonatic, and everyone listening, everyone who's built a voice app, everyone who uses Alexa frequently, you'll know that there's a lot of effort going into the text-to-speech voices, trying to make them sound either more natural, trying to improve the intonation. And, you know, when we spoke to Nicholas Bergstrom on the podcast last week, and we were on LinkedIn with him the week before, and he kind of gave us a real good overview of why it's so important to have synthetic voices that have different styles. Because if you were just going to read out some really short, snippy stuff, then you would be speaking differently to if you're going to read a full news article. And so there's a whole lot of work going into making text-to-speech voices fit for purpose for the kind of interactions that they're supporting. One is, you know, as I mentioned, the short one-shot interactions versus the long-form kind of like news reading thing. So you'll notice Amazon Alexa now has a news reader style. There's kind of brief mode and all this kind of stuff. But they all tend to not necessarily have a huge amount of emotion. And remember when we spoke to Ben McCullough, this is kind of what he was getting at, is that synthetic voices don't convey intonation too well, and they don't show emotion too well. Now, yes, you can mess around with SSML, you can try and make things and, you know, shoehorn things to sound a little bit more emotive, but ultimately it doesn't sound entirely convincing. And again, you know, when we spoke to Oren Jacob, he was talking about it's not intended to completely mimic human interaction. So maybe you don't want it to sound entirely and utterly convincing, but still, certainly if you want to create more of an experience, you want it to sound half decent. So this company, Sonatic, have created a technology that will turn a text-to-speech synthetic voice and make it cry, basically. And it uses, you know, a whole load of different kind of algorithms and ways of doing it. And it's not too bad. If you know, we'll put the link as we do in the show notes. And if you take a listen, it's not too bad. But the reason why I thought it was interesting is because when we worked on the Unilever Dove skill, Dustin, a while back, I don't know if you remember, where I spent hours and hours trying to make Alexa cry, and it was the most painstaking experience of my life, because it's just impossible. You know, I ended up just putting a whole load of gobbledygook into Polly, because we were using the Amy voice. Whole load of gobbledygook into Polly, taking out the MP3 files, and then basically chopping out all of the bits that I might get away with making sound like a cry. Then I was like time shifting it and pitch shifting it, time stretching, pitch shifting, and a whole load of stuff, adding human breaths in there and all that kind of stuff. And it ended up sounding reasonably, you know, all right, but it didn't really sound good enough. So in the end, we ended up scrapping it and just having someone record themselves crying. So I know how hard it is to even just make audio sound like that. But so yeah, it must be a difficult feat. But what do you reckon? Synthetic voices be getting more emotional, conveying more kind of deeper sadness and all that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
This one was pretty convincing. I think if I heard it, I would probably, without reading the article, I would probably still know that it was synthetic. There were a few tells, but the technical challenge is really, really interesting. It does bring up a lot of questions about the appropriate use of synthetic voices. Should there be disclosure? Obviously, in this case, it was being used for games and animated voiceover. But there really are so many ethical considerations. The other is obviously deepfakes and mimicking real people's voices and how that might be used in like phone scams using bots. So I think the technical challenge is really interesting. I hope that folks are having some of those more ethical considerations at the forefront.
It's interesting. We touched on that kind of last week as well, didn't we? I think, or the week before, around the whole kind of ethics and stuff like that. And, you know, duplex is always used as an example of, you know, how would you feel? We talked about X.AI, weren't we? And like, how would you feel
That's right.
if you didn't know it was a bot and it's kind of like doing something for you and stuff like that? And yeah, it's interesting because as the technology advances, there's obviously then scope for people to take it into their own hands and do, you know, naughty stuff with it, so to speak. And you can imagine if you can automate outbound phone calls and you've got someone crying down the phone and telling you that they're homeless and all they need is like, you know, $100 and they'll have a place to stay for the night, and there'll be maybe a segment of the population that might kind of feel sorry for them and go ahead and do something like that.
Yeah, or imitating somebody that you know, or an authoritative body telling you to do something. These are all sort of considerations that aren't new with technology. It's just like a new way that things could be potentially used in a malignant fashion, but still something that I think is interesting to consider. There is another company called Resemble AI that does something similar. I think that they are trying to get more natural intonation in addition to reproducing real voices in a synthetic form. There's also an older project. I'm not sure if you guys remember when Roger Ebert was first going through his cancer situation. He was about to not be able to speak anymore on his own. But there were so many pieces of footage of audio content of his voice that researchers were able to replicate his voice so that he could then speak again through this synthetic voice. And it was one of the earliest examples that I had seen of that being done. It must have been maybe 10 years ago. Do y'all remember that?
I don't think I do. No, I do, Dustin.
It sounds familiar. Yeah.
There's a great TED talk about it. Super interesting. But now that's sort of status quo, and we can all potentially replicate our voices in a synthetic form.
You know what it makes me think of is our conversation with James Vlahos. I believe that was back in 2019. So he's the one who wrote Talk to Me about the rise of voice and smart assistants. But he has also founded a company, I believe, called Hereafter. So James, what he did was his father was dying and he was interviewing his father and created a chatbot that is in the voice, so to speak, of his father. For example, his father would never end sentences with prepositions. This chatbot doesn't do the same. And it allows him to continue conversing with a representation of his father, at least. And I wonder if there's enough sample there where this could be something that someone does in the future, where they sample voice, create a custom text-to-speech voice there, because that also relates to our next story, which is also about text-to-speech, which is Facebook's new voice synthesis. The headline here is that they were able to create the voice in 500 milliseconds, which is not fast, but in terms of synthesis of speech is quite fast. But the other thing that was quite interesting there as well is it only requires 30 to 60 minutes of data to create these voices, I believe, which is significantly less than you would need in other systems. What did the two of you think of this story?
24,000 bits of data, apparently, that all of the other text-to-speech systems require to be able to produce, synthetic voices. And Facebook have compressed that entirely, which is impressive.
I think Resemble AI claims to be able to do it in like 300 sentences or something along those lines, but I haven't tried it out, so I don't know how effective that is. I'd have to go back and see if that's actually the claim. This was an incredibly technical article, which was interesting to sort of try to read through. But buried beneath all of the technical pieces was an idea around not only having the voice of the voice assistant change based on the content of what they're saying and intonation and prosody there, but based on the context of the user. So if the user was in a rush and heading outside of their house, then the voice assistant might speed up and speak really fast. Or if they were in a loud environment, then the voice assistant might yell. So I thought that was an interesting approach to those two scenarios, and I think they offered a third one. Curious about y'all's thoughts on whether that might be the appropriate sort of approach to that scenario, or if there are alternatives, like maybe abbreviated speech in a moment of hurry, or some other sort of possibilities.
Yeah, just audio, I think, as well. Just rather than using speech, using audio to communicate if people are, on the way out or what have you. Yeah, I think what was interesting about that is that you don't often see much from Facebook, do you? In terms of, and that's the kind of, I know there was a bit of a technical article and stuff like that, but I thought it was interesting to get into, because you very rarely hear or see Facebook publish much when it comes to voice. Everyone knows that they're working on it. I know some of the conversation designers working in the AR and VR kind of space. Remember Alana Shalowitz, who we had on way back? She's now over there. And yeah, so they're definitely working on stuff, but you never really hear about it. And it's like it's interesting when you do hear them kind of publish stuff, because I think what they're concentrating largely on is the whole AR and VR side of things. And so when it comes to I don't know if this is the case, but it'd be interesting to get your kind of thoughts on it, is that if I think about what Facebook are doing with voice and AR and VR and things like that, you can imagine it being like everything will be inside that Oculus headset or what have you. And when it comes to gaming and stuff like that, the latency is really, really important. So being able to generate speech really quickly in real time, like as you're going through a game situation or whatever, is really, really important. And so I don't know whether they are concentrating on using this technology to make games more interactive, or whether there's another thing that they're working on which has something to do with the assistants that we have come to know, like the Alexas and Google Assistants, and helping people get stuff done or be productive or whatever. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts on what you think that Facebook are doing when it comes to voice and VR.
I hadn't thought about that before. I think it's probably a bit of all of the above, productivity and all the rest, but I think you're right. Gaming is a perfect scenario for when you would want really, really quickly to generate not only the speech, but even perhaps the copywriting. So that'll be interesting to check out.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget that Facebook owns WhatsApp, and Messenger is still a very popular messaging platform. So certainly for things like reading messages out to someone, that's a different vector as well. Certainly Portal hasn't been super interesting or super popular, although I know two people in a long distance relationship who have bought two of them. So people are buying them. But Facebook's tentacles reach out very far. And like you mentioned, Oculus, and then you've got WhatsApp as well. You've got Instagram, which there's probably not much of a play there, but who knows?
Yeah, there's still audio messaging in Instagram. Similar to LinkedIn, you can record and send audio messages, and so it's not beyond the realms of possibility to think that they may do something with Instagram that would allow Instagram accounts to have automated direct messages with people. I don't think that's probably not too far a stretch to think that might happen.
And potentially going further into AR and Instagram too. We might see augmented reality shopping in Instagram in the near future.
What might be interesting, augmented reality is one, but this is maybe a little bit futuristic, but if 3D cameras were able to be commoditized to the point where you can get them on your phone, then people on Instagram could be taking 360 videos that you could then consume and interact with through the Oculus headset, and then trigger a direct message with their automated bot off the back of it to then maybe, I don't know, buy something that they were talking about in the video. So like that, you know what I mean? Yeah. That's anyway.
Is that what?
Go on.
Yeah, is that similar to what Spectacles did? I don't remember too much about Spectacles, but that was a 360 of sorts camera, if I recall correctly.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Yeah.
But speaking of social, the other really interesting story was about Clubhouse, and its new valuation at, what was it?
$100 million.
Amazing. It sounds like it's invite only. Yeah, there are only a couple thousand folks that are on it, but they all seem to be constantly on it and loving it.
It's interesting. I'm wondering how it works, because I remember when we had Daniel Gonzalez on the podcast from Soundbite, and it was really interesting because he was talking about how to make voice social is really, really, really difficult, because you need most of the attempts that had come beforehand you needed a way of recording and then a way of labeling. So you record something in your app, then you've got it, and then you need to label it and call it something and then post it. But then people need to discover it. So people need a screen and to be able to scroll, and then they need to read what the description of it is. And by the time you've done that, he said, you may as well not listen to the audio because you should be able to understand what's almost being said in the description. So he was saying that a lot of the audio first or voice first social media platforms are basically Twitter, but being able to press play instead of reading the tweet. And so he was saying that there's some real challenges when it comes to making a proper voice first social platform. So I'll be interested to see what it actually is and what it does differently.
So from what I understand, it's actually all live. So it's almost like the return of the party line, the party hotline. I believe that you can enter a room and either engage by talking or just listen to other people speak. And so it's sort of this almost audio version of chat roulette, from what I understand.
Dustin, what are your thoughts, Dustin?
I have lots of thoughts. I mean, it's something where there is the cachet of exclusivity right now. My old colleague at General Assembly posted about it recently, Nathan, and he talks about how he loves it because you can chat with the Silicon Valley luminary, so to speak. Is that still going to be such a popular thing when the masses, so to speak, are let in? I don't know. I mean, I think also always something useful to keep in mind as well is the Yo app. I don't know if either of you remember that. Claire, do you remember this? I feel like you might.
I do, yeah. There's the Yo app, and then there's also more recently the TTYL app. Are you familiar?
It's the same thing?
Sort of, yeah, it's a party line kind of opportunity where you can speak to multiple friends almost on a phone call, which is really funny. But I think that there is something to this idea of spontaneity and serendipity of entering into a conversation that you don't know what the topic is or content is going to be. We're sort of all used to these filter bubbles that we've created for ourselves in all of our channels. And so I can sort of see the appeal of getting away from that, entering a space, not knowing what you're going to find and just engaging with it.
Yeah, I think the half of the challenge with it will be if you remember when, like, even Alexa is a prime example, but social media is a prime example, and websites are another example, is that when you open the floodgates and you allow anyone to come on and create content, you inevitably have there is the kind of really high quality stuff which is in the minority, and then you get a load of rubbish which is in the majority 9 times out of 10. So if you think about, in the early days of WordPress, now there's some fantastic websites built on WordPress, but there's a whole load of just one-man band kind of blogs that are just not very good that no one really looks at. Same kind of thing with Alexa skills. There's some really, really good ones, but then there's a whole load of rubbish ones. And so it's interesting on a platform like this, where engagement is important, to understand whether the same kind of thing will happen and whether or not it will be, wading through the treacle to find something interesting, or whether or not it'll be a little bit more kind of TikTok-ish, where there's a format, people kind of learn the format, and then it's more engaging because of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Thinking about some of the earlier topics, it'd be interesting to sort of tie some of those synthetic voices into this sort of experience. Maybe they'll have synthetic moderators at some point to try to bump up the content when it's less interesting, or to ensure that the content is meeting guidelines and that sort of thing.
Yeah, cool. So the next story is about the global hearables industry. It's apparently, so it was worth 21.2 billion in 2018. Is that all? But it's estimated to reach 92.4 billion by 2026. 17% growth from 2019 to 2026. Now, I remember when we were at Project Voice at the start of the year, and there was a whole load of materials on hearables and the importance and the opportunities and things like that. And it's an interesting space, because it's not only your likes of headphones and things like that we'll probably discuss in a moment, but also things that, for accessibility purposes, things like hearing aids and a whole load of other devices that are becoming smarter, essentially. So yeah, I don't know who put that kind of one in the doc there.
Yeah, I put this in. I'm really interested in the topic of hearables, somewhat because of it being really the first wearable that is socially acceptable to wear, and that augments perception. So we've seen Google Glass, it came and went. We've got our Apple Watches, but they aren't really augmenting perception. It's just a phone that's on your wrist. So this idea that we have headphones in, and we might wear them around even when we're not listening to content, just waiting for a phone call to come in. It's easier to sort of keep them in than to put them in your pocket. I think it's sort of a game changer in terms of not only augmenting our hearing and amplifying certain things and maybe closing us off to other things when we want to listen to content, but it's a knowledge base in your ear at all times. So I think we're going to see some really, really interesting applications come out of the hearable space in the next couple of years, not only in terms of interactive audio content, but some of these hearables have health monitoring capabilities. They can potentially check your temperature or detect your heart rate. So the fitness opportunities are huge there. But there's also a huge opportunity for new ways of interaction design, new gestural inputs based on accelerometer data, like the way that you turn your head orientation, or other things like that, and how that might affect interactions with games, interactions with content, ways of non-verbally communicating with your voice assistant, all those sorts of things.
Mm. Do you remember I said, do you remember? It was only like a couple of months back, but the Bose glasses. You know, when they come out, I don't know whether they're still going around.
They're called the Frames, and I have them, and
really?
They're so cool and so nerdy, and I love them.
Is it actually good?
They're just fun. I would wear them. I was sort of testing them out, and I went to a developer seminar and got a chance to make some simple Hello World applications. But it's kind of cool. You can just wear them when you're walking around. You feel like you're just wearing your sunglasses, but you can hear like your music, and you can actually talk through them. The audio quality is great because they're from Bose. I don't know that they're completely practical as a replacement for headphones, because obviously you're not going to wear them when it's shady outside or raining, but they're super, super fun.
Because that was the thing I was thinking, is that they've got pretty good motion detection, haven't they? And so if you can accept, and if you build an app for it, you can tap into it. So you can essentially have someone wearing them, and if you kind of nod, it knows. So it can sense when you nod, can sense when you shake your head. And so if you think about taking voice into public spaces, one of the things is that is almost like a barrier, is people being a bit self-conscious about talking to themselves in public or talking to their phones in public. And I think that over time that'll be overcome. It's similar to taking a selfie in public. People used to be horrified about doing that. Now you walk down the park and every second person's taking selfies. You know what I mean? So I think it'll kind of get to that point. But in the interim, and also for places where it's a bit more quiet, the post office, or you're on the bus or whatever, being able to have something come in, you've got a message from so-and-so, should I read it? And just be able to nod your head like that and have it read for you. It's quite an interesting concept, isn't it?
So a lot of the latest wireless headphones have accelerometers already as well, even the ones that have the really tiny form factor. I don't think that they are all utilizing them yet, but the technology is there.
Yeah, I used to have the, I guess I still have them, but I don't use them anymore. There's this company called Braggy who made one of the first wireless earbuds. So got this back in, I guess, 2015, 2016, and they had head gestures for controls. So exactly that, there's an incoming call. I think you did your head up like that, but you could also pause, you could move back and forth the track as well. And it is incredibly useful. You think you're going to look a little silly, but especially when you're on a crowded train or something like that, it's quite useful.
I think the other thing that's interesting about this story and some of the ones that we were talking about earlier is how design for accessibility can drive forward our technological progress and the experiences for everyone. So there's this idea of universal design, and it's not designing for everybody, because we all know if you design for everybody, you design for nobody, but it's all about designing for the fringes of your potential users. And when you design for folks that may have some like impairment or challenge, then everybody's experience is elevated. So coming out of like the hearing aid market, they really drove the technology forward that allows for sound amplification and all of these other sort of like miniaturization of the form factor type things. And then we were speaking about the synthetic voices. And I think that some of the initial research really did come out of trying to replicate the voice of somebody who might have lost their ability to speak. So just interesting to think about accessibility as driving forward progress.
So Sam Sethi has commented and said head gestures plus bone induction and AR lens. So that's kind of like, I think what he's describing is the concept which we've touched on again quite a few times in the past is a lot of different technologies fusing together to create a more immersive, natural kind of interface where the interface is whatever is kind of close, whatever's at hand kind of thing, you know what I mean? Which is quite interesting. And Dustin,
thanks.
So go on.
Oh, no, I was just saying thanks to Sam for that comment. If anyone else is listening in, watching in, feel free to leave a comment with a question or anything you want us to discuss. But Kane, you were about to say something?
I was going to say you've going to round this. We'll do this the final segment after, but the final story is one of yours from Algolia.
Yeah. So this is a bit self-promotional, so please forgive me those listening in, but I think it's quite interesting nonetheless. So Algolia is where I work. We're a search API company. We power Twitch, NPR as a customer as well. Not just voice, but really web, mobile, anywhere that there is search. And we announced today that we partnered with a company called AI to release a cross-browser speech-to-text widget. So if you are a website owner, you can drop this into your website and you can have voice search really anywhere, any modern browser, essentially. So Safari on iOS is a big problem for speech-to-text input on browsers. Because it doesn't have it built in natively. The only browser right now that really has it built in natively is Chrome, and that doesn't work on iOS because all iOS browsers are essentially Safari. So we partnered with Assembly AI, and now anybody can plug that in, just like you could for the longest time with iOS and Android native that we've released as well. So really, no one has an excuse anymore to not have voice search if they have an app or a website. I would ask you, Kane, Claire, how often do you use voice input? Do you find it useful when you're on a website, you're on a mobile app, and that?
I actually don't use it often to navigate websites, but I was recently talking with a friend who has low vision, and he shared with me the experience of using some of the accessible text-to-speech applications for navigating websites, and they were really, really, really clunky. So I think that there's a huge opportunity to make that design more fluid, and it sounds like this might be a direction in that area. So I'm really interested to check it out.
I've started using my voice for whatever I can, because I'm finding now that the typing is just frustrating me more and more and more. Especially if I'm just on the way downstairs and all I want to do is just fire off a quick text or just reply to a LinkedIn message or something like that. I use my voice probably, I would say 8 times out of 10. If I'm on a website, if I want to search for something, I'll put my cursor in the search box, and as soon as the keyboard comes up, I'll tap the mic on on the iOS keyboard. I do the same when I search for anything in the browser. I'm doing it more and more and more just because I can't be bothered to type. Sounds really kind of like first world problems. but yeah. But Sam Sethi has asked, what's the name again, please?
The name of the company is Algolia. We'll include a link perhaps in those LinkedIn comments and in the show notes as well. So if you go to the Algolia blog, we've got it linked, and then we're partnering with Assembly AI. No financial stake or anything there other than they're a great company. So I would recommend, if you have a speech to text need, they're an interesting one to check out. They're interesting because their cost structure is going to be so much lower than you're going to get on Google Cloud Platform or AWS, and the the performance is top notch. It really understands pretty much anything you can throw at it.
Nice. Assembly AI. That's interesting. Cool. Well, final segment then, the last couple of minutes. What are you thinking about this week, Claire? What's been on your mind, and what have you been pondering over the course of this week?
I've actually been talking with that friend that I was mentioning about. So he's actually a UX designer, and thinking about ways of still being able to do some UX design, but through other means outside of dragging pixels across a screen. And so we've been sort of thinking about different ways that could be approached, whether it's a tactile way of designing using like Legos and then image recognition to take a picture of the composition and then digitize it, or is it more of a voice user interface and then getting audio feedback about where a container or a drop down menu might be located? And so it's sort of this long-term project, really just pie in the sky thinking about how that might be approached.
Interesting. I'd love to see more voice interfaces in software programs. Like I think about how many keyboard shortcuts I need to learn in Audition when I'm editing
exactly
podcasts.
Yeah.
How many I need to learn for Photoshop just to put a gradient on a background and all this kind of stuff. It's just that I just want to be able to talk it, you know what I mean? Just get it done. Yeah. What about you, Dustin? What are you thinking about at the moment?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what. Lots of things on my mind, but one thing I wanted to share with the people who are listening is something that I shared with the two of you before we started, because I was so impressed by it. I like these little touches. We were talking about how in Google Docs, obviously, when you're typing and you misspell something or you use poor grammar, which what I found is most of the time actually that grammar check, I disagree with it, but it's certainly on the spelling, it's quite useful. But just like in newspapers, when you want to say, hey, this spelling mistake or this grammar mistake is on purpose, I put it there on purpose, you can put bracket SIC and readers go, okay, well, this journalist is quoting them and not changing things. In Google Docs as well, if you put brackets SIC after a misspelled word, all of a sudden that squiggly line goes away. So I just thought it was a nice little touch where the natural language understanding there is understanding, oh, well, no, actually, the spelling mistake, we don't need to point this out. I thought it was quite smart. What about you, Kane? What's on your mind?
I'm thinking, what I've been thinking a lot about this week is, so I mentioned I did that webinar with Oracle today, and the whole concept of the webinar was about how things around COVID have changed behavior. And there's a whole load of studies out there now that have been done over the last few weeks. NPR's is one of them. The smart audio report. There's a voice bot report. Voxley Digital have done one, and there's a whole load of reports showing how during this period of time, people are using voice assistants more. They're experimenting with more functionality. They're asking the all recipes skill, for example, rather than saying, can I have a recipe for spaghetti bolognese, people are asking more specific stuff like, what can I cook with mushrooms? And so people are trying more stuff. Shopping has increased over 12% in this period, so people are transacting on them. And we've always said that voice is training wheels, so rather smart speakers are training wheels for voice in other areas. So those that have a smart speaker end up using voice on their mobiles more since having a smart speaker. And so I've been thinking a lot about confidence and user confidence, and how people having all of these interactions in the home with their smart devices, smart speakers, what effect is that going to have outside of the home when we all return back to normal? And first of all, are people going to want to be not touching stuff, not being around people, not being in kind of confined spaces, and can voice interfaces help all of those to kind of have the interactions work better in all of those areas where we've got digital screens like McDonald's menus and click and collect screens and all that kind of stuff. But beyond that, because I think that's probably gonna happen. But beyond that, what I've been thinking a lot about is how, on a higher level, what Google and Amazon are doing is training people. Like I've said, smart speakers being training wheels. Now, if you think about when Google first launched the search engine, and people have got accustomed to now searching on Google, people now have such a high expectation of what performing a search on a website is, because they've got it directly from Google. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a one person florist in the high street, or whether you're a Tesco or you're a huge corporation. When someone types something into a search bar, they expect a result, and Google have trained us into expecting that. When someone checks out online, your kind of expectation of what an online checkout looks like and what an online checkout experience is comes from your likes of Amazon, who've patented that one-click checkout process. And so the seamless checkout process doesn't matter whether you're an insurance company selling insurance, or if you're a garage booking MOTs. The experience of going through paying for something online is being set by Amazon. And so what's happening now, I feel, is that those two companies again are building this relationship through the smart speakers and through the voice assistants with users, so that users are expecting now the new standard, the new experience standard, is to be able to talk to the big companies. Now, I'm getting used to talking to Google, I'm used to talking to Amazon. So in my mind, I'm thinking, if and when will the time be when we're so used to talking to Assistant, talking to Alexa, that we then start to expect it? Not like, oh, if it has a voice interface on a train ticket machine, I'll use it. When will we get to the point, and will we get to the point where we're so used to it happening in our houses that we just expect it on websites, we expect it in apps, and we expect it wherever we go in physical locations? I don't know what kind of you think about that, but that's kind of what I've been thinking about over this week.
Yeah, I don't think it's too far off. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dustin.
No, you got further in. Go ahead.
I don't think it's too far off, but I think part of what will propel that forward is also this idea of sort of lowering the boundaries between voice designer, voice developer, and interaction designer, product developer. I think those sort of go hand in hand. As soon as anybody who's developing a product realizes that voice can be an input that they can use, then products will incorporate voice in a more fluid and cohesive and holistic way. And I think we'll see that pretty soon.
What were you going to say, Dustin?
Yeah, I think Claire covers that very well. I think there's one more thing to add as well. Usually we do end with a "What are you thinking about?" segment, but I think there's one thing that we did forget, Kane, which is we did add to the VUX World website something that I think is very interesting, which is the voice conversational strategy assessment. Kane, what is that? Why would people want to check that out?
Good question, and we should have probably put that at the top of the show. So maybe in the audio edit, I'll move it because I forgot about that. It's been a busy week, but yeah, we did. We launched on Monday. We launched the voice readiness assessment, and the idea of that is one of the things that people struggle with, and brands tend to struggle with, is the whole idea of their voice strategy or their conversational strategy. Like, what they know something's going on. They know that these devices exist and that there's something interesting happening, and that there's going to be an impact on their organization. But many don't really know how to start, how to go about it, what to do. What use cases make good use cases? What skills do I need to be able to actually do it? What platforms do I need to be looking at? And what does success look like? All of these kind of questions. How do I get started? Is what people struggle with. And so, we've spent the last 2.5 years speaking to the cream of the crop of the talent in the industry. We've worked on plenty of projects through VUX World and outside of that on lots of voice initiatives. And so we kind of thought that we did the free consultations, the free 20-minute consultations in March, and that went really, really well. And so we thought, what else can we do? What else can we do to help? And this is kind of born from that. So essentially, it's an online assessment. You just go to vux.world/voice, and you just complete the assessment. It'll ask you a series of questions around your business and your objectives and what you've done in the past, etc., etc., etc. And once you've done that, it comes to me and Dustin, and we'll both go through it and we'll analyze what you've got, and then we'll put together a report that'll give you a voice readiness score, which will tell you how ready you are, how prepared you are compared to other similar companies in your industry. And it'll give you a whole load of guidance and insights about what you can do practically tomorrow to start getting started and start taking the right steps in the right direction.
Yeah, we've had a very good response so far. It's been a lot of fun hearing what people's struggles, what their expenses are, and talking with them about what they can perhaps look at in the future. I think we'll probably do an entire podcast episode about that coming up soon. But as Kane mentioned, if you want to get a jump on that, we've got that up on the website.
Indeed. So it's vux.world/voice. Very quickly before we wrap up, Sam has asked a question, which is around, he'd love to ask for next time about skill developers paying for keywords so that skills auto-load. So I think he's talking about the implicit invocations. And also another comment around people asking for skills is the wrong way around. Alexa should know my location, context, and then just load skills for me, which is interesting. I think we probably don't have time to get into that, but maybe next time, this time next week, we'll put that as one of the first things that we'll ask and we'll answer is a debate around implicit invocations and whether there'll be any monetization and advertising to get people to jump the queue when it comes to that. So yeah, in the meantime, Claire, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you along on the rundown. It's been fantastic.
Thank you.
And Dustin, as always, and we'll see you all next week. What's next week? Next Thursday again, is it? It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, next Thursday, 28th.
28th.
28th again. So the three of us will join all of you to discuss the rundown. Until next time,